The silence in the sacristy was my only companion that Sunday afternoon. I'm Christopher, 41 years old, a priest for almost 2 decades at the small parish of St. Thomas in Vermont. The walls of the church know my deepest secrets, especially that secret I've carried since my teenage years and tried to bury under layers of religious devotion. My calling was always my refuge, a perfect hideaway for the feelings that tormented me. I chose to serve God as a way to repress desires I considered impure. For years, it worked. My routine of masses, confessions, and counseling filled my days and emptied my mind. Until that Tuesday afternoon, when Harrison walked into the confessional. If you've ever felt that instant connection with someone, you'll know exactly what I mean. Leave your like if you've also experienced that inexplicable moment of recognition between two souls. Subscribe to the channel and hit like to get access to more stories like this. My daily routine was as predictable as the seasons. I'd wake up before dawn for my morning prayers, watching from the parish room window as the mist blanketed the mountains of Vermont. The aroma of the coffee I made mixed with the scent of the old books lining my little office. Thomas Parish is tucked away from the center, surrounded by century-old trees and boasting a view of the lake that mesmerizes me in the late afternoons. On Sunday mornings, the church fills with the faithful, but during the week, silence rules. My footsteps echo through the empty corridors as I organize the liturgy, answer phone calls, and visit the sick in the community. My only indulgence was the little beach house I inherited from my parents, 3 hours away. A refuge where, once a year during my vacation, I could simply be Christopher, not Father Christopher. There, the sound of the waves replaced the church bells, and the endless horizon reminded me that there was a world beyond the parish walls. Father, I can't keep pretending anymore. The deep, trembling voice came from the other side of the confessional screen. It was Tuesday afternoon when, for the first time, Harrison knelt to confess. At 38, he was a respected man in the community, married for 15 years to Madison, father of 2, a manager at a local bank. My marriage is falling apart because I can't keep denying who I really am, he continued, his heavy breathing revealing the weight of his words. I have thoughts about other men. I always did. But I thought that by getting married, they'd disappear. My fingers clenched the rosary as I struggled to maintain my professional composure. It wasn't the confession that disturbed me, but how every word of his felt like a mirror to my own silent struggle. The truth is, I'm living a lie, Father, and I don't know how to continue. After that day, Harrison began showing up regularly for spiritual counseling. Every meeting was an exercise in self-control for me. His presence in my parish office, with those piercing blue eyes and restless hands, awakened feelings I had buried for decades. Our conversations soon went well beyond the religious context. We discovered a mutual interest in Russian literature, and I started lending him my favorite Dostoevsky books. Harrison reciprocated by bringing over jazz vinyl records, which we'd quietly listen to in my office after our counseling sessions. Did you know I've played saxophone since I was 15? He remarked one afternoon while we analyzed a passage from Coltrane. My dad was against it, said it wouldn't lead anywhere. Maybe that's why I ended up as a banker. During our weekly meetings, we exchanged more than just words. We shared fragments of lives unlived, abandoned choices. On walks through the church gardens, we talked about everything from existential philosophy to childhood memories. Once, I even helped him fix his car when it broke down near the parish. We worked side by side, our hands occasionally brushing as we passed tools, each accidental touch sending waves of guilt and fascination through my mind. You know, Christopher, he said one day, using my first name without the priestly title for the first time. You're the only person with whom I can be completely honest. May arrived with the promise of my annual vacation. During our last session before I left, I casually mentioned the beach house. It looks exactly like what I need right now, I commented while organizing some papers. A place where no one knows me as Father, where I can just be Christopher without expectations. Harrison fell silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on some distant point. Madison took the kids to her mom's yesterday. She said she needs space to think. I guess we're really over. That night, alone in my quarters, guilt consumed me like fire. Not just for what I felt, but for what I desired. My priestly vows felt like ropes tightening around me. During my nighttime prayers, the words felt empty. For the first time in 20 years, God seemed distant, and my calls echoed without reply. I stared at the clerical collar around my neck in the mirror, a symbol of a promise that now felt more like a prison. The conflict between my vocation and my feelings was no longer just an inner battle. It had taken shape in the form of a man with blue eyes and a restrained smile. 3 days after arriving at the beach house, I was still adjusting to the different pace away from the parish. I woke up with the sun rising over the ocean, made my coffee, and went for a walk on the still cool morning sand. The freedom to wear just shorts and a t-shirt, without the weight of the clerical collar, was almost intoxicating. It was on my way back from that walk that I spotted a car parked in front of the house. My heart raced when I recognized a silhouette leaning against the white fence. There was Harrison, dressed in faded jeans and a blue shirt that highlighted his eyes. He looked different, less formal, more genuine. His brown hair, usually neat, was now tousled by the sea breeze. "How did you find me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the inner turmoil. "You mentioned the name of the beach once," he replied with a hesitant smile. "It wasn't hard to figure out which house belonged to the Williams family. It's a small community." I invited him in, my hands trembling slightly as I opened the door. The house was one story, simply but cozily decorated. Worn sofas with light throws, shelves filled with books, and big windows framing the ocean. "Sorry for showing up unannounced," he said, glancing at the family photos on the walls. "Madison decided to extend her stay at her mom's. She said we need some time apart to figure things out for the future." I made some coffee while he talked about his journey here. I noticed how his fingers gripped the cup, how his eyes avoided mine for more than a few seconds. There was a palpable tension in the air, like the static before a storm. "I just couldn't stop thinking about our conversations," he finally confessed, looking out the window. "About how I feel when I'm with you. Like I can finally breathe after being underwater for years." I stayed silent, my heart pounding in my chest. Years of repression and discipline had kept me still, even when every part of me longed to get closer to him. "Maybe I should go," Harrison murmured, interpreting my silence as rejection. "No," I replied quickly, my voice stronger than I expected. "Stay for dinner at least." We spent the rest of the day in a silent dance of closeness and distance. We walked along the beach, talking about everything except what really mattered. We prepared dinner together in the small kitchen, our arms occasionally brushing as we chopped vegetables or reached for spices. Every casual touch sent waves of warmth through my body, dissolving years of self-restraint. After dinner, we sat on the porch with glasses of wine, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The sea breeze carried the scent of salt and possibilities. "Do you know what scares me the most?" he asked, breaking a long silence. "It's not the end of my marriage or what people will say. It's the idea of finally being honest with myself." I turned to face him, meeting his unwavering gaze. There was vulnerability there, but also determination. "Chris, he started, his voice faltering. "I never allowed myself to feel this way before." The space between us shrank imperceptibly. I could feel his warmth, count his heartbeats near his neck. My mind screamed warnings about vows and promises. But for the first time, I wasn't listening. The first time our lips met was like an eclipse, something forbidden, rare, and transformative. His hand found my face with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with the intensity of the moment. Years of denial and repression melted away with that touch. "I've waited so long for this," he whispered against my lips, his voice choked. We moved into the house without breaking our embrace, as if we feared that any gap between us might break the spell. The silver light of the moon streamed through the windows, casting dancing shadows on our skin as we explored uncharted territory. Harrison led me as if we were on an expedition through unknown lands, discovering every sensation together. His hands roamed over my body with reverence, deciphering a map I never even knew existed. Every touch was a revelation, every sigh a prayer unlike any I'd known before. Time lost all meaning as we became each other's cartographers, mapping emotional and physical scars, uncovering spots that elicited gasps and others that brought nervous laughter. Our bodies spoke an ancient, instinctive language that went far beyond words. "You're trembling," he noted one moment, concern flashing in his eyes. "I've never been so scared," I admitted, "and yet so sure." The experience was like diving into deep water after a lifetime of fearing the ocean. There was the initial terror of vastness, followed by the surprising discovery that I instinctively knew how to swim. Our bodies moved in sync, like waves meeting the shore, sometimes with devastating force, other times with a hypnotic softness. The physical connection carried years of shared conversations and silences. Every movement revealed truths that words could never express. Harrison knew me like no one else. Not just my body, but my soul with all its contradictions and complexities. When we finally collapsed, exhausted and transformed. The moon had traveled much of the sky. Lying side by side, our breathing slowly returning to normal, I felt a peace I had never experienced before, as if all the fractured parts of me were finally coming together. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his fingers tracing invisible patterns on my chest. "About how something considered a sin can feel so sacred," I answered honestly. Harrison smiled, a smile that reached his eyes in a way I had never seen during our parish sessions. Maybe we've been misunderstanding what divinity really means all along. We fell asleep intertwined, as if our bodies feared parting even in sleep. For the first time in decades, I didn't pray before bed. I already felt absolved. Dawn brought not just a new day, but a new version of myself. I woke up before Harrison and watched him sleeping peacefully. His relaxed face looked years younger, without the worry lines that usually marked his forehead during our parish conversations. The reality of what we'd done began to sink in with the morning light. I didn't feel the crushing guilt I had expected, but instead a strange mix of clarity and confusion, as if I had woken from a deep sleep only to find the world completely different from what I had imagined. I got out of bed quietly and walked down to the beach. The ocean was calm, almost placid, reflecting a sky that was gradually turning pink and gold. I sat on the sand, closed my eyes, and tried to make sense of everything I was feeling. 20 years of devotion to the church don't vanish after one night of passion. The weight of my vows was still there, but now there was a counterbalance, the feeling of finally being honest with myself. How could I balance these opposing forces? Was it possible to serve God while being who I truly am, or would I have to choose? "I thought you might have run off." Harrison's voice interrupted my thoughts. He came over and sat next to me on the sand, keeping a small distance between us. "Just trying to process everything," I replied, watching as the morning light highlighted the golden hues in his brown hair. "Do you regret it?" he asked, his voice betraying the vulnerability he tried to hide. I took a deep breath before answering, knowing my words could change everything. "I regret waiting so long to be honest with myself. I don't regret anything that happened between us." Harrison smiled, but his eyes stayed serious. "What happens now, Chris? Will you go back to the parish and I to a failing marriage? Do we just pretend nothing's changed?" "Everything's changed," I said, feeling the weight of that truth. "I can't go back to being who I was yesterday, and I don't want to." During breakfast in that little kitchen now loaded with new memories, we talked about possibilities. There were no easy answers for either of us. Harrison needed to settle his marriage honestly, and I was facing decisions about my priesthood. I spent so much time advising people to be true to themselves, I reflected as we washed the dishes side by side. And all this time, I was living my own lie. "It's never too late to start living authentically," Harrison said, his simple words carrying the weight of universal truth. That morning was a pause between two worlds, the one we'd known and the uncertain future that lay ahead. The connection between us had transformed, deepened. It wasn't just physical desire or intellectual compatibility, but a mutual recognition of souls who had finally found the courage to truly exist. "I could stay here forever," Harrison remarked as we looked out the kitchen window at the ocean, his arm casually draped around my waist. "Reality is bound to catch up with us eventually," I replied, though part of me wished we could remain in that time bubble, protected from the outside world. That afternoon, as we walked along the beach, we let the certainty of change settle in. Whatever path we chose from here on out would demand courage and sacrifice. "When I was a kid," Harrison said as he collected shells on the damp sand, "my dad used to say that men don't cry, don't show weakness, don't love other men. I spent decades trying to be the son he expected. And I spent my life trying to be the priest I thought God wanted," I added, knowing exactly what he meant. Maybe we were both serving ideals imposed on us, not our own truths. Night fell with an unexpected storm, distant thunder announcing its approach. We closed the windows as the wind grew stronger, turning the once calm sea into furious waves. The storm's energy seemed to mirror the intensity of the emotions we were facing. Sitting on the couch, watching lightning briefly illuminate the dark sky, Harrison took my hand. "No matter what you decide, Chris, I want you to know that tonight meant everything to me. Not just because of what we did, but for what we allowed ourselves to feel." The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the air clean and the beach dotted with seaweed and shells buffeted ashore by the strong waves. Harrison got a call from Madison. She'd be back in 2 days and wanted to talk about the future of their marriage. The reality we had kept at bay was finally catching up. "I need to go back," he said, hanging up the phone with a grim look. "I owe her an honest, face-to-face conversation." I nodded, feeling a swirl of conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted him to stay, to ignore that call and keep living inside our protected bubble. But I knew that real relationships can't be built on dishonest foundations. "Will you tell her about us?" I asked, dreading the answer yet needing to know. Harrison ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I now recognized as his nervous habit. "I'll tell her the truth about me, about who I am. The specific details. I don't know if they'd bring anything but more pain right now." I helped him pack his few belongings. Every item in his backpack seemed to carry a piece of the intimacy we had built. The silence between us was heavy with unspoken words and promises we were too afraid to make. "And you?" he finally asked, standing at the door with his backpack over his shoulder. "What will you do when your vacation ends?" That question had been hovering over me since sunrise. Going back to the parish meant resuming a life of denial that now felt impossible. I couldn't imagine celebrating Mass, hearing confessions, or preaching about truth and authenticity while living my own lie. "I have 10 more days here to figure things out," I answered honestly. "But I know I can't go on like before. It would be hypocrisy that neither I nor God deserve." Harrison stepped closer, cupping my face with his hands. His eyes traced every detail of my expression, as if trying to memorize me. "I'm not asking for promises or guarantees," he said softly. "I just want you to know that, no matter what happens, you helped me find the courage to be who I really am. And that's a gift I could never repay." Our last kiss was different from the first, not laden with the urgency of discovery, but filled with the depth of recognition. It was a kiss of gratitude, a temporary farewell, and a prelude to future possibilities we still dared not name. "I'll reach out once I've talked to Madison," he promised, pulling away reluctantly. "This isn't our end, Chris. It's just the beginning of something that needs to be built on honesty." I watched as his car drove away along the coastal road until it disappeared around a bend. I stayed on the porch long after he left, feeling the sea breeze on my face and uncertainty in my heart. There were no manuals or sermons to guide me in that moment. That night, alone in the house that had briefly sheltered our intimacy, I did something I hadn't done since I was a child. I wrote a sincere letter to God. Not a formal prayer or a plea for forgiveness, but an honest chat about who I really was and what I felt. "If you created me this way," I wrote through tears, "there must be a purpose to my authentic existence. Maybe my true calling is to serve in a different way, living the truth instead of preaching it from a pulpit." The following days were filled with deep reflection. I took long, solitary walks on the beach, spent hours just watching the ocean, and even talked with imagined friends and mentors. Gradually, clarity began to emerge, not like a sudden flash, but like dawn, slowly lighting up the horizon. Subscribe to the channel and hit like to get access to more stories like this. On the 7th day after Harrison left, I received his message. I talked with Madison. It was hard, but necessary. She deserved honesty. "We're starting the separation process. When can we talk?" That simple message crystallized my own decision. The next morning, I called the bishop of the diocese and asked for an urgent meeting once I returned. It wasn't going to be an easy conversation, but like Harrison, I needed to follow the path of truth. Today, 3 days before I head back to the city and face the consequences of my choices, I feel a peace I've never experienced before. The fear is still there, of course, fear of judgment, rejection, and the practical challenges ahead, but it is outweighed by the feeling of finally being aligned with my true self. Harrison and I agreed to give ourselves some time before exploring what lies between us. We both need to resolve our personal issues before considering a joint path. There are no guarantees it will work, but for the first time, I'm open to the possibilities an authentic life can offer. This journey has taught me that true spirituality isn't about denying who we are. It's about honoring our deepest nature. Perhaps the greatest service we can offer God, or any higher power we believe in, is to live with authenticity and love. The white fence of the beach house now holds memories that have transformed my life. Tomorrow, I'll walk these sands for the last time, grateful for the space that allowed my rebirth. I'll carry not just memories of Harrison, but the courage I found in myself. For those of you who, like me, live torn between external expectations and inner truths, I share this account as a testament. It's never too late to choose authenticity. The path isn't easy. There will be storms, judgments, and losses. But the freedom of finally breathing as your true self is worth far more than any false comfort a lie could ever offer. If my story touched something in you, if you saw your own struggles in my words, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I'll share updates on my journey in the coming weeks, the challenges of rebuilding a life based on truth, And yes, news about Harrison and what the future holds for us. I don't know exactly what awaits me when I leave this beach, but I know I'll be walking toward my truth for the first time in 4 decades. And that in itself is a blessing greater than any I've ever offered from the altar. Subscribe to the channel and hit like to get access to more stories like this.